She wore my title for 8 months. I spent every one of those months making sure she could not keep it. My name is Eleanor Ashworth, and I am the Duchess of Pennington, though I did not wear that title in public for the better part of a year, and when I finally did, there was paperwork required to prove what I had already lost once and had no intention of losing again. This is the story of how I let a woman steal something that belonged to me, and how I stole it back without her knowing I had ever left it. I was married to James Aldrich, Duke of Pennington, for 4 years. We were not in love. He needed a wife of particular blood and particular fortune to satisfy both a family expectation and a mortgage. And I needed a title and the independence it granted a woman in this country. It was an honest arrangement, which is to say we both got exactly what we had negotiated for, and neither of us was surprised by anything we received. James died in April of 1820 of an inflammation of the lungs. In his townhouse in London, with me in the country at Pennington itself. Seeing to the spring planting of the home farm because one of us had to, and it had never once in 4 years been him. I was a widow for 9 days. On the 10th day, a woman I had never seen walked into the house at Pennington with James's solicitor, who looked at me with a particular kind of hope he was not being believed, and laid out a marriage certificate dated the year before mine, under James's first name and a woman's name I did not know, and said the woman standing beside him was that woman, and had therefore been the Duchess of Pennington all along. This is impossible, I said, because it was. The marriage is recorded at St. James's, Piccadilly, under the date of the 16th of March, 1819, said the solicitor. There is no legal ambiguity regarding the validity of the earlier union, Your Grace, former Your Grace, I should say, and the lady here has as much right to the title as you do. I had never been hit in my life until that moment. This was approximately equivalent to being hit. What I did was sit down. What I did next was stand back up and ask for a solicitor of my own. And when James's aunt offered to ring for one, I told her no. I would find one in the village, and I walked out of the drawing room in front of a woman wearing a wedding ring that matched my own, because of course it matched. I had picked out that ring. I had stood in a jeweller's shop on Bond Street and chosen the exact gold and the exact weight of it, and I did not let anyone see me weep until I was alone in my own horse's stall, which was a thing James had never once troubled to give a name to, but which had always been the only room in any house where I could be entirely certain of privacy. I did not know, sitting in a horse stall in the late afternoon light, that I was not actually defeated. I only knew that I had been made a fool of, and that it had taken 9 days for anyone to bother telling me I had ceased to have a claim on anything I thought I owned. The woman's name was Margot Ashworth, and according to her own telling, which the solicitors confirmed, she and James had married secretly, at her family's insistence, on the 16th of March 1819. 14 months before I ever met him, and they had kept it a secret because her family and his family had feuded over property lines for 40 years, and the marriage was meant to heal the breach. James had married me afterward, she said, because he and Margot had agreed to separate for a time, and I was part of some arrangement I could not quite make out, because nobody speaking to me seemed comfortable explaining it, least of all James's solicitor, who I eventually got out of the whole situation by pointing out that if James had actually been married to Margot all along, then he had married me bigamously, and I had rather liked to see what a court did with that particular scandal. The solicitor turned grey and excused himself and did not come back. But Margot remained. She moved into the house at Pennington with a woman she introduced as her companion and a man who was presumably being paid to look official, and she dressed as a duchess would dress, and she gave orders to the staff with a woman's authority for the first time in the 4 years I had been there, and she did it with a particular viciousness toward the servants who had known me, as though proving her title meant proving I had never mattered at all. I could have stayed and fought it immediately. I had money of my own, My marriage settlement had been specific enough that Margot could not touch it, for all she now controlled the estate. I could have hired solicitors and spent years in a courtroom and come out the other end, either confirmed in my title or destroyed in trying. I did neither. Instead, I left. I went to my father's house in Berkshire, which was what Margot wanted, I think. She wanted me gone, and she wanted it to look voluntary, as though I had been given a chance to leave quietly rather than be forced out, and I let her believe that was exactly what was happening. What I was actually doing was much slower and much more thorough. Margot had made a critical mistake, though she would not know it until the moment the judge ruled against her. She had been so confident in her claim that she had not bothered to cover her tracks carefully. She had simply walked into the Pennington household with a marriage certificate and a solicitor's assurance, and assumed that what James's solicitor said must be true. Because no woman would go to the trouble of forging such a document. She did not understand that a forged document is only as good as its supporting evidence, and that true evidence, once looked for, becomes nearly impossible to hide. I hired a solicitor named Mr. Pennington, no relation to the dukedom, a coincidence that the man himself found amusing, who had a reputation for being expensive and absolutely without sentiment toward matters of law. I told him, plainly, what I believed had happened, that James had married me in good faith, not knowing about Margot, or knowing that he had married Margot but believing the marriage was dissolved, or would be dissolved, or married to a woman who had convinced him of something that was not actually true. "You believe the woman is a false claimant," Miss Pennington said, without judgment. "I believe James told me he was a bachelor when he married me, and the law of this country has never permitted a man to be legally married to two women simultaneously, and I would like to know which marriage is the false one. I have 8 months before the will probates and Margot's position becomes legally settled. I would like to use that time finding out. That is a very long time, Your Grace." "I am not the Duke's Grace anymore, Mr. Pennington. I am Mrs. Ashworth, recently widowed, and I have a great deal of time and a considerable amount of money, and I would rather like to know, before I stop being either, whether I was married to a man who betrayed me or married to a man who had been betrayed by someone else entirely." It took Mr. Pennington approximately 40 seconds to decide he liked me. It took him 6 months to prove what I had suspected by day 4. The investigation took 6 weeks before it yielded anything concrete. Mr. Pennington hired men to search parish records across England, to trace Margot's movements, to interview people who had known James before I met him. For 4 weeks there was nothing but dead ends and contradictions. A woman who had simply appeared in James's life, married him allegedly in secret, and then disappeared for 8 years. It made no sense, which was precisely why it had worked so well. What kind of fraud is so transparent that it must be the truth? It was Mr. Pennington's man in Lincolnshire who found it, a woman named Margaret Smith, married to a Mr. Thomas Smith in 1811, still listed in parish records as living at the address she had given at her marriage. A woman who had never formally separated from Mr. Smith, which meant when she married James, she had married him while legally bound to another man. "She has never divorced," Miss Pennington said, bringing me the records. "She has simply disappeared from the parish records and presents herself elsewhere under a different name. If Mr. Thomas Smith still lives, which he apparently does, he is listed in the 1820 census records at the same address. Then she is bigamously married to James, which means she cannot possibly be the legitimate Duchess." I held the paper with the census record and felt something like pity for the man who had so thoughtlessly left his wife to her own devices that she had simply invented a new life. "We cannot proceed publicly yet," I said. "If she suspects, she will destroy the records from her side, and Mr. Smith might be persuaded to make trouble, or to sign documents that protect her. We need to have every piece in place before we make a move. That could take months. Mrs. Ashworth, I said I would have 8 months. Mr. Pennington, I meant it. Let me have them." The middle 4 months were the most difficult, because that was when Margot began to sense that something was wrong. She could not have known what it was. She had no reason to believe I was investigating her. But she had the particular instinct of a fraud who has gotten away with the first lie and is now terrified of the second. She began to ask questions of the household staff about where I had gone and whether I had hired solicitors. She began to watch the post and to intercept letters when she could. The closest I came to being discovered was in the 6th month, when she confronted my father's solicitor in a London street and demanded to know whether I was taking legal action against her. My father's solicitor, a man named Whitmore, who had known my family since before I was born, came to me immediately and said I should know that the woman was frightened, and frightened women do unpredictable things. And perhaps I should press forward with the case now rather than waiting. I told him no. I told him I had been patient this long, and I would not stop now, and that Margot's fear was precisely what I wanted. I wanted her afraid. I wanted her to understand, in the deepest part of her bone, that she did not actually belong in that house, and that everything could be taken away at any moment. I wanted her to feel, for 8 months, exactly what I had felt on the 10th day, the knowledge that she was not safe, and that something was wrong, and that there was no way to fix it. It took all the discipline I possessed to sit in my father's house and wait, and not to rush forward and end it before I was ready. It was only when Mr. Pennington had secured a statement from Mr. Thomas Smith himself, a weary man apparently, who was more relieved than anything else to finally understand what had become of his wife, that I gave the word to proceed. The day before the will probates, I told Mr. Pennington, "That is the day we present this to the court, not a day before. She will have had the settlements by then, Mrs. Ashworth, I am aware. She will have them for exactly 1 evening, and then they will be taken back again, in front of whatever magistrates and clerks and witnesses the court can assemble. I want her to have tasted everything she stole, and then lose it all at once. That is the price of my patience. What I wanted, you see, was not just to be restored. I wanted her to have tasted all of it, the title, the house, the authority, and to have it taken away from her in front of everyone who had smiled at her and accepted her. I wanted every tenant on the estate to know that they had given their obeisance to a false duchess. I wanted every guest who had sat in that drawing room to understand that she had lied to their faces. I wanted her to feel, for a moment, what it had felt like for me on the 10th day, when a woman I did not know walked through a door and took everything away. The last 2 months, I confess, I watched her. I had taken rooms in a village 2 miles from the house, and I hired a woman to tell me about the Duchess, where she went, what she wore, whether the staff was beginning to turn against her in the small ways that servants do when they sense change coming. What I learned was that Margot had begun to drink, and to be cruel, and to have the particular frantic energy of a woman who could feel something wrong but could not name what it was. She had started asking the solicitors when the will would probate, and had begun hinting to the steward that perhaps the home farm could be worked differently, in ways that would provide a more immediate return. The night before the court hearing, I did something I have never told anyone. I went to Pennington, to the window of the drawing room, and I looked inside at the woman sitting at the desk that had been mine, going through papers with the particular desperation of someone trying to arrange finances that were about to become impossible. And I felt something very close to pity for her, which surprised me, because I had been counting on not feeling anything but vindication. Pity is a complicated emotion when you have spent 8 months engineering another person's fall. But I did pity her, a little, for she had no idea what was coming, and no preparation for it, and no allies to help her face it. The court hearing took 4 hours. The judge, a man who had known James's father, listened to Mr. Pennington's evidence with the particular severity of a man who does not like being made a fool of by association with fraud, and by the end of those 4 hours, Margot had been declared the holder of a forged marriage certificate, a false duchess, and subject to prosecution for fraud if the Duke's estate chose to press charges. Which it did not, because I instructed them not to, because I found that what I wanted was not her punishment but her removal, and prosecution would have made the whole thing a matter for the courts to discuss for years. Instead, she was escorted from the house within a day, with nothing but the clothes she was wearing and the money in her purse. And I came back into Pennington as the woman who had always owned it, and there was not one person on the estate or in the household who did not understand perfectly what I had done and why. What I did not expect was what happened 3 days later when the Duke arrived. I say the Duke because James was dead, and I had been about to assume the title of Dowager Duchess. But James had a younger brother, Nathaniel Aldrich, and the dukedom had passed to him, and he had ridden out from London directly upon hearing the news about Margot, because apparently the London scandal sheets were already running versions of it, and he had wanted to see the house and the estate and the woman who had quietly, over 8 months, demolished a false duchess without raising her voice or asking anyone for help. I was in the home farm office when he came in. I had gone back to work the day after the court hearing, because work is what one does when one is not sure what else to do, and he stood in the doorway and looked at me with an expression I could not quite name. "Mrs. Ashworth," he said, "I have come to offer you, officially and on behalf of the estate, any compensation you believe appropriate for the loss of your title and the inconvenience of the last 8 months. That is kind of you, Your Grace. I am not sure what compensation would be appropriate for something I have now recovered entirely. You did recover it, did you not?" He came into the office without being asked and sat down without being offered a chair, which told me something about the sort of man the new Duke was. My brother left me a house and a title and a considerable number of problems, but until 3 days ago I did not know he had left me a woman who could be quieter and more dangerous than any man I have ever encountered in legal matters. "Tell me plainly, why did you wait 8 months?" "Because I was not certain," I said. "Because I wanted to be sure I could prove it absolutely, without the shadow of a doubt, so that there could never be any question about my right to everything I had lost. Because I wanted her to have worn the title long enough to believe it was truly hers, so that losing it would cost her something real. And now I am Duchess again, Your Grace, and I have no further need of anything beyond what I already have." He was quiet a long moment. "Will you stay?" he asked finally. "In the capacity of Dowager Duchess, which is what you legally are, and in whatever capacity beyond that you are willing to accept, which I am prepared to offer at nearly any price you name." "What do you mean?" "I mean that I have inherited a house that ran perfectly while you were supposedly powerless and is already falling into disrepair under the steward's actual management without your quiet hand. I mean that every tenant in the county has apparently been telling my own agent that they will take their grievances to the real duchesses rather than to their duke. I mean that the woman who could have simply waited for a court date and let the law do its work instead chose to gather evidence and wait 8 months so that you could walk back into this house as the woman who had always belonged here, rather than the woman claiming restoration." He stood up again and looked at me with something close to awe in his face. "I would like to know, Mrs. Ashworth, if you have considered that you are exactly the person who should be running this estate, because I can tell you plainly that I do not have the patience for the work you have already proven you can do invisibly." I wanted to say no. I wanted to hold on to the victory I had earned, small and quiet as it was, and not risk it again by trusting another Aldrich with anything that mattered. What I said instead was, "I will stay on as Dowager Duchess. Beyond that, we will have to make arrangements that both of us can be comfortable with. I am not interested in love, Your Grace, but I am very interested in being heard and respected, and treated as though I actually understand the estate that I have been quietly running for 4 years and then spending 8 months proving I had a right to. That seems entirely reasonable. And I will continue to make decisions about the home farm, the household accounts, and the tenant disputes. You may make decisions about your title and whatever charities you wish to support with the fortune that comes with it. Beyond that, we will have to negotiate each matter as it comes. I can accept that, said Nathaniel Aldrich, who would turn out to be, over the years, a man of his word in a way his brother had not been, and who never once, in the 15 years we spent together, questioned a decision I made regarding the estate or the people in it. What happened over the years that followed was not love, which I had stipulated plainly that I did not want, but it was something considerably more durable than most marriages built on passion. Nathaniel learned, as I had intended him to learn, that the estate ran because I willed it to run, that the tenants obeyed because I had earned their obedience, and that the account books balanced because I chose to balance them. He was a man content, eventually, to be the figurehead his title required him to be, while I continued to do the actual work. I dressed as a dowager duchess should dress. I kept Nathaniel's social calendar. I bore his name formally, though I never took his bed, having negotiated that particular point firmly on the day he asked if I would stay, and having found him, to my surprise, entirely accepting of the arrangement. What I gained was the freedom to do what I had always done: run an estate, manage a household, make decisions without needing to ask a man's permission first, without the constant fear that it could all be taken away by means of a forged document and a woman's bare-faced lie. The woman who wore my title for 8 months never married again, and died in obscurity in Dover, still using the name Ashworth in public, still convinced, I have always suspected, that she had been something more than she was. I did not gloat over her fall. I did not need to. I had what I had always owned, and she had what she had always deserved, which was nothing at all. My only regret, if I have one, is that I never knew James well enough to know whether he had been fooled by her or merely used by her. I have made peace with the fact that I will never know the answer. What I do know is that I learned, over the course of 8 months of quiet investigation and patient accumulation of evidence, that power obtained through patience is worth considerably more than power granted through inheritance or purchased through beauty or marriage. The woman who loses everything and then meticulously, deliberately steals it back is the woman who will never have to lose it again, because she alone understands the full cost of that loss. This is the story of how a woman loses everything and then, quite quietly, ensures she never loses anything ever again.